In the low country of South Carolina, where the rivers run black under cypress knees and the Spanish moss hangs like funeral lace, there stands a house the maps still call Pendleton Hill. Most folk who pass it now say the windows are boarded, the fields gone back to pine. They are half right. The boards are there, yes, but every few decades one of them loosens, just enough for a girl on the edge of 14 to see moonlight fall across a dress laid out on a chair that wasn't there the night before. The Pendletons were never loud people. They paid their debts, went to church when the road wasn't flooded, and kept their daughters close, closer than most thought decent, until the morning of the 14th birthday. Then, without announcement or guest list, a wedding happened. Always small. Always quiet. Always to a man no one could quite remember the next day. Not drunk forget, not old age forget, a hollow, eye-sliding kind of forgetting, the sort that leaves you certain you must have met him but unable to summon a single feature. Tall, some said. Fair, said others. A traveler, a cousin twice removed, a friend of the family from Charleston. The stories never matched, and after a while no one asked. 6 generations of daughters left that house as brides and came back, if they came back at all, as mothers who would not speak of their wedding night. Their portraits still line the upper hall, soft oval faces, lace collars, eyes older than 14 should allow. And in every frame, just over the left shoulder of the bride, there is a shadow where the groom should stand. Painters blamed the light. Photographers swore the plate was flawed. But the shadow is always the same height, the same breadth, the same absence. They say if you walk the corridor at 3 in the morning on the eve of a Pendleton girl's 14th year, you can hear silk brushing the floorboards behind you. Turn, and there is nothing. Turn again, and the newest portrait has already been hung, the paint still wet, the groom's space already empty and waiting. Tonight, somewhere in that house, a clock that hasn't worked since 1943 is ticking again. Tomorrow, another license will be filed. And somewhere, a girl who has never believed in curses is learning that belief is the one thing the curse has never required. The year was 1831, and the Pendleton house still smelled of new heart pine and the tar they used to caulk the chimneys. Eliza Pendleton was 13 years and 11 months old, tall for her age, with the kind of red hair that caught fire in lamplight and made the field hands cross themselves when she passed. She had spent the spring teaching a crippled mockingbird to perch on her wrist, whispering to it in the garden while her mother watched from the piazza with the tight, thin mouth that had settled on her face the morning after her own wedding. On the night of September 23rd, the house was quiet the way only river houses get quiet. Thick, wet quiet, broken by the occasional slap of water against the rice trunks and the low, steady complaint of frogs. Eliza's bedroom was on the 2nd floor, back corner, window facing the family graveyard where the older stones leaned like tired sentries. Her mother had tucked her in early, kissed her forehead with lips that felt cold even through the fever of late summer, and locked the door from the outside. That was ordinary. Pendleton daughters were locked in from the age of 12 for their protection, though no one ever said from what. At some hour past midnight the house woke to a single scream, sharp enough to cut glass but brief, as though a hand had been clapped over the mouth that made it. By the time the upstairs maid reached the door with her key, the room was empty. The bedclothes were turned back neat as Sunday, the window latched from the inside, the mockingbird fluttering against the ceiling with a broken wing. A single length of white ribbon lay on the floorboards, the same ribbon Eliza had worn braided through her hair that morning. It smelled faintly of river mud and something metallic no one could name. 3 days later a runner came from Georgetown, 60 miles south, with news that a girl answering Eliza's description had been married in the little brick courthouse there to a man who gave his name as Mr. Ashe. The clerk remembered the bride was very young, pale, barefoot under her white dress, but smiling in a way that made him uneasy. The groom paid the fee in Spanish silver and asked that the certificate be sealed at once. When the runner tried to press the clerk for more, the man only shook his head and said the groom's face kept slipping from his mind even while he looked at it, like trying to hold water in a fist. Eliza never came home. A miniature painted the year before still hangs in the upper hall, her eyes already older than the rest of her face. And if you stand beneath it long enough on a September night, some say you can smell river mud drifting up through the floorboards, faint as a memory no one asked to keep. The year 1857 arrived with yellow fever in the air and secession talk on every tongue. Clara Pendleton was 14 in April, small-boned, black-haired, and wild the way a marsh hawk is wild, all quick eyes and sudden turns. She had heard the servants whisper about her Aunt Eliza, about the ribbon and the empty room, and she had decided long ago that no locked door, no family silence, no cold-lipped mother would pen her the same way. On the morning of her birthday she stole a horse from the stable, a grey gelding named Santee, and rode bareback through the rice fields before the sun had burned the mist off the water. She made it as far as the old causeway where the planks were rotten and the tide licked underneath like a dog. There the horse shied at something Clara never saw, threw her into the pluff mud, and bolted. She lay stunned, ankle twisted, dress plastered black to her legs, while the mosquitoes found her throat. Hours passed. The sun climbed and sank. No one came down the road from Charleston, no one from the plantation. Just when the dark began to pool under the pines, 3 riders appeared out of the swamp as though the trees themselves had exhaled them. They wore long dusters despite the heat and rode without speaking. Their horses were wet to the hocks, as if they had swum the river instead of crossing the bridge miles upstream. Clara tried to crawl. One of the men dismounted, slow, deliberate, boots making no sound on the planks. When he bent to lift her she saw his face only for an instant, ordinary enough to forget, yet something in the set of the eyes made her stomach turn over like a fish on a line. She screamed then, a full-throated marsh hawk scream that sent egrets exploding from the reeds, but the causeway was empty in both directions and the scream came back smaller, as though the air itself swallowed it. They carried her home after moonrise. The grey gelding was already back in its stall, curried and calm, as if it had never thrown her. Her mother met them on the piazza without surprise, took the sodden girl by the wrist, and led her upstairs to a dress that had not been there that morning, white silk, seed pearls, cut for a bride. The ceremony took place in the small parlor at midnight. The same 3 riders stood witness. The preacher, fetched from the colored church on the far quarter, later told his wife he could not remember the groom's name though he had written it himself not 10 minutes earlier. When he tried to picture the man's face all he saw was the reflection of the candle in the window glass, empty. Clara's portrait was painted the following spring. In it she stands beside a chair no one is sitting in, one hand resting on the carved back as though someone had just stepped away. Her eyes look straight out, black and bright and furious, the eyes of a girl who still believes running is possible even when the door is already locked from the outside. The summer of 1884 was merciless. Heat shimmered above the rice fields like a lie, and the Pendleton house, newly wired for electric light that no one trusted, smelled of camphor and old grief. Margaret Pendleton, the 3rd daughter in direct line, had turned 13 the previous winter and already carried herself with the brittle stillness of someone counting days. She spent her afternoons on the widow's walk, watching the river road through a spyglass, waiting for something the grown-ups refused to name. In August a man arrived from Charleston calling himself Mr. Lucius Drayton, special correspondent for the News and Courier. He was thin, sharp-featured, with a waxed mustache and the kind of restless energy that made the house dogs growl low in their throats. He claimed to be writing a series on the vanishing planter families of the Low Country, but his questions circled one subject only, the Pendleton brides. He had read the courthouse records in Georgetown and Walterboro, noticed the pattern of sealed certificates, the grooms whose signatures looked disturbingly similar though decades apart. He wanted photographs. He wanted the family to speak plainly for once. Margaret's mother refused him the house, but Margaret, reckless with the curiosity of the almost doomed, met him in secret at the old summer kitchen. She let him take her picture in the doorway, sunlight slicing across her collarbones, and whispered that the next wedding would come soon, sooner than anyone admitted. Drayton gave her a silver card case engraved with his initials and promised to return with a lawyer and a judge if need be. He came back 3 nights later, uninvited, climbing the magnolia outside the east wing with his camera strapped across his chest like armor. From the garden below, the cook saw the flash powder bloom white against the leaves, once, twice, then nothing. By morning Drayton was gone. His room at the boarding house in Plantersville still held his valise, his pressed shirts, the half-written article titled The Stolen Brides of Pendleton Hill. The camera was found hanging from a low branch, lens cracked, leather case soaked with river water though the tide had not reached that far. When the plates were developed days later in Charleston, every image was black except one, a blurred silhouette in a dark coat standing just behind Margaret as she posed in the summer kitchen doorway. The figure had no face the chemicals could catch, only the faint suggestion of height, of weight, of something occupying space that refused to be seen. The family burned the photograph in the kitchen stove. The silver card case was never found. Margaret's wedding took place the following month on a night, so still the mosquitoes seemed afraid to move. The preacher who came afterward could not recall traveling the road at all, only waking at home with mud on his shoes and the taste of iron in his mouth. And in the upper hall, Margaret's portrait joined the others, pale hand on an empty chair, eyes fixed on a place just beyond the frame where something had stood long enough to leave its absence behind. The winter of 1909 came early, frost blackening the rice stubble before All Saints' Day. Ruth Pendleton was small, bookish, and already half in love with leaving. She had found a loose floorboard under the rug in the old nursery and hidden beneath it a diary bound in cheap blue cloth, the kind schoolgirls bought in Charleston for a nickel. Every night after the house slept she lit a candle stub and wrote in a cramped, furious hand, as if speed could outrun what was coming. She began with facts: Eliza gone in 31, Clara dragged back in 57, Margaret photographed with something that had no face in 84. Then she wrote what the portraits would not say, that the grooms were the same man. Not brothers, not cousins, not lookalikes. The same man wearing new names the way other men wore Sunday suits. She had compared the marriage certificates her grandmother kept locked in the plantation office, held them to the lamp until the watermarks lined up. The slope of the capital A, the way the T crossed like a dagger, the tiny curl at the end of every Y identical, though the earliest was signed when Ruth's great-grandmother was still a child. She wrote about the smell that drifted through the house the week before a birthday, river mud and candle smoke and something sweeter, like lilies left too long in a closed room. She wrote that the clocks ran backward when no one watched. She wrote that her mother had begun measuring her for the dress in September, fingers trembling as they pinned the hem, whispering, "Hold still, child, it will all be over soon," the same way someone might soothe a horse before the vet comes with the needle. On the night she turned 14-7 days, Ruth stole the office key from her father's waistcoat while he slept off Sunday dinner and laudanum. She spread every certificate across the turkey red carpet and arranged them by date. Then she did what no Pendleton daughter had dared: she copied every groom's name onto a single page and stared at them until the letters crawled. Elias Ash. Nathaniel Ashford. Cornelius Ash. Always Ash, only the prefix changed, like a snake shedding skins. And beneath the newest one, dated 1884, the ink still looked wet though 25 years had passed. She wrote, "He does not age. He only waits." She wrote, "I will not wear the dress." She wrote, "If I disappear, burn this book so someone will know it was murder, not mystery." The diary ended there, the last sentence scratched so deep the nib tore the paper. The blue cloth book was found years later by a cousin cataloguing the attic for taxes, wedged behind a trunk of moldy confirmation dresses. The final page was missing, ripped out clean. But the words that remained had been read so many times the paper shone like satin, as though generations of unseen fingers had turned them long after Ruth herself was led downstairs in white lace to meet a groom whose name, that night, was simply Ash. The year 1933 broke the pattern, or seemed to. For the first time since the house was raised, a boy was born to the direct Pendleton line. They named him Thomas after his grandfather, wrapped him in the same christening gown every daughter had worn, and the women of the family exhaled as though a stone had been lifted from their lungs. No 14th birthday loomed for little Thomas. No white dress waited in the armoire. The older aunts burned pinches of dried rosemary in every room and told one another the curse had died with Ruth, that the river had taken its due and moved on. Thomas grew tall and quiet, married a girl from Asheville whose people had never heard of Pendleton Hill, and in the spring of 1955 brought home a daughter they named Lillian. The house, shuttered for years while Thomas tried city life in Columbia, was opened again. Servants were hired, the roof patched, the portraits dusted. The aunts came back too, thinner now, eyes bright with something between relief and suspicion. They watched Lillian crawl across the same heart-pine floors where Eliza had once chased a mockingbird, and they told themselves the clocks would keep normal time. But on the night Lillian turned 6 months old, the grandfather clock in the attic, one that had not chimed since Ruth's wedding, struck 13 slow, deliberate notes. The sound rolled down the stairwell like a warning coughed up from the foundations. Thomas laughed it off. The mechanism must have rusted loose. He climbed the narrow stairs with an oil can and found the pendulum swinging, though the weights had been removed decades earlier. When he reached to still it, the clock fell silent the instant his fingers brushed the brass, as if it had only wanted him to notice. The chimes returned every year after that, always on the eve of Lillian's half-birthday, always 13. The aunts stopped laughing. They began measuring the girl against the doorframe the way their mothers had measured them, pencil marks climbing like guilty verdicts. Thomas forbade it, threatened to sell the house, but the deed was tangled in a trust older than the state itself, and the river road always flooded when he tried to leave for good. By the time Lillian was 12, the smell was back, river mud and lilies rotting in still water. The white dress appeared in the cedar wardrobe, though no one admitted sewing it. Thomas drank. His wife left for Asheville and never returned. The aunts sat on the piazza shelling peas in silence, eyes fixed on the bend in the drive where the riders had once come for Clara. On the night Lillian turned 13, the clock in the attic began to chime at sunset and did not stop until dawn, each stroke heavier than the last, as though something inside was walking down the stairs one step at a time. Thomas loaded a shotgun he had never fired and sat in the upstairs hall outside his daughter's door. At 3 in the morning the chimes paused. Footsteps crossed the attic floorboards overhead, slow, deliberate, the measured tread of a man choosing the right moment. Thomas raised the gun toward the ceiling and waited for the trapdoor to lift. The footsteps stopped directly above Lillian's bed. Then the clock began again, softer now, almost tender, counting down the hours that were left. The year 1956 belonged to Evelyn Hargrove, who was not a Pendleton by blood but by the careless arithmetic of cousins. Her mother had been born a Pendleton daughter, the only one in 3 generations to escape the house before her 14th year. She had married a Marine and vanished to California, swearing never to speak the family name again. Evelyn grew up in Long Beach, sunburned and fearless, believing the stories her mother sometimes muttered in fever dreams were only the Low Country's way of exaggerating everything. When Evelyn turned 13, her father died in Korea and her mother drank herself quiet, so Evelyn took the Greyhound east with $53 and a postcard that said, "Come if you ever need us," signed Aunt Corinne, Pendleton Hill. She arrived in August, all elbows and curiosity, hair bleached white by Pacific sun. Aunt Corinne met her at the little station in Georgetown with the same thin mouth every Pendleton woman wore after her wedding night, but she hugged Evelyn anyway and said the house had room. The first weeks were almost ordinary: cicadas, iced tea, Lillian, now a silent, watchful girl of 1 year, crawling across the parlor rug. Evelyn explored the way California girls do, fearless, prying up loose boards, reading letters not addressed to her. She found Ruth's diary minus the last page and laughed at the melodrama until the smell of river mud drifted through her bedroom one night and she woke with her heart kicking like a mule. On the afternoon of September 9th, Evelyn borrowed Thomas's old Ford to drive into Plantersville for Coca-Cola and lipstick. The car coughed once on the causeway, the same rotten planks Clara had fallen through a century earlier, and died as neatly as if someone had turned a key. Heat pressed down. Dragonflies stitched the air. Evelyn got out to look under the hood and felt the silence change, the way it does when you realize you are being watched by something that already knows your name. The black sedan came from the direction of the river, though no road led that way. It was long, old-fashioned, shining like wet obsidian. 3 men stepped out in dark suits too heavy for the weather, hats pulled low. One opened the back door without a word. Evelyn laughed at first, some local joke, a ride to town, then saw their faces were ordinary in the most unsettling way, faces you would forget while still looking at them. She ran. The mud sucked her shoes off. The men did not hurry. They simply walked, and the distance between them shrank as if the marsh itself carried her backward. She woke in the front parlor of Pendleton Hill at twilight, wearing a white dress that fit perfectly though no one had measured her. Aunt Corinne stood in the doorway wringing her hands, whispering, "We didn't know you were close enough kin, child, we didn't know." The ceremony was over before Evelyn understood it had begun. The groom signed the register Evelyn Ashford Hargrove in handwriting that curled like smoke. When she tried to scream, her voice came out soft, almost curious, as though someone else were using her throat to ask a polite question. The 3 men stood witness. Thomas watched from the stairs with the shotgun across his knees and did not lift it once. The marriage license was filed the next morning in Georgetown. The clerk remembered a tall man in an old-fashioned coat paying in cash, but when he looked again the space beside the bride was empty, as though the ink had already begun to forget. The spring of 1978 smelled of dogwood and gasoline. The house had electricity now, fluorescent lights that buzzed like trapped flies, but the family still held weddings in the old parlor because the river mist pressed too close to the new windows. Beatrice Pendleton, 17 going on 40, was the first daughter born after the long male gap, and the dress had been waiting for her since she was 11. She had grown up on the stories, Eliza, Clara, Ruth, Evelyn, thought them ghost tales meant to keep girls obedient, and laughed when her mother locked the bedroom door each night for tradition. She had a boyfriend with a Camaro, a plan to leave for Clemson in August, and a Polaroid camera she carried everywhere like proof that the world was solid. The wedding was set for the Saturday after her 14th birthday, though no invitations went out. On Friday night the house filled with the old smell, river mud, lilies, candle smoke, and Beatrice locked herself in the bathroom with the camera and a bottle of Boone's Farm strawberry wine. She took pictures of everything, the clawfoot tub, the spiderweb in the window, her own bare feet against the cracked tile, anything to prove later that she had been real and unwilling. At 11:43 the power flickered. The mirrors fogged though no one was breathing on them. Beatrice heard the soft shuffle of slippers in the hallway, her mother, her aunts, the slow procession coming to dress her. She aimed the camera at the full-length mirror on the back of the door and pressed the button just as the knob began to turn. The flash was blinding. When her vision cleared, the groom was already in the room. He wore a plain dark suit cut the way men wore them before the war, hands folded in front of him with the patience of someone who has never been refused. Beatrice screamed, but the sound stayed inside the glass like a moth beating against a jar. She lifted the camera again and shot him point blank. The Polaroid word spat out its square, and she watched the image develop while he waited without blinking. In the photograph Beatrice stood alone, mouth open mid-scream, one hand clutching the wine bottle like a club. Behind her the mirror reflected the empty bathroom perfectly, towel on the rack, fog on the glass, the spiderweb trembling in its corner. No groom. Not even a shadow where a man 6 feet tall should have thrown one across the tile. The reflection simply erased him, the way a tide wipes footprints from wet sand. She took 5 more pictures in the 30 seconds before her mother's key scraped in the lock. Every print showed the same thing: Beatrice, the room, the open door behind her, and nothing else. The groom watched the squares develop with the mild curiosity of a man watching rain slide down a window. When the last one curled white and empty in her shaking fingers, he reached out, not roughly, almost gently, and took the camera from her. He turned it over once, as if weighing its harmlessness, then set it on the sink where the lens stared at the ceiling like a dead eye. Downstairs the preacher was already waiting. The Polaroids were left scattered across the bathroom floor, face up, showing a bride screaming at no one. By morning someone had gathered them into a neat stack and placed them in the family Bible between the births and the deaths, where they yellowed slowly over the years, the images never changing, the absence in every mirror growing darker with each decade that passed. The winter of 1999 was mild, the river low enough that the old rice trunks showed their bones. Dr. Mara Whitfield, 34, assistant professor of archival studies at the College of Charleston, came to Pendleton Hill with a grant, a laptop, and the detached curiosity of someone who believed curses were metaphors for trauma. She had traced the Pendleton brides through courthouse ledgers across 3 counties and noticed something no clerk ever had: every marriage certificate, from Eliza's in 1831 to Beatrice's in 1978, carried 2 witness signatures. The second was always the groom's, but the first was different each time, a name that belonged to the previous groom, signed decades after any reasonable lifespan. She arrived on a Tuesday in January with permission from the current owner, a distant cousin who lived in Atlanta and wanted the house catalogued for insurance. The family had scattered, only a caretaker came twice a week. Mara worked in the plantation office, spreading brittle certificates across the desk like tarot cards. She photographed each signature under magnification, then fed the images into an early forensic handwriting program she had helped design. The results came back within hours. Probability of single author across all samples, 99.7%. One man had witnessed every wedding, signing with the name he had worn the previous time, as though he were politely reminding the record that he had been there before and would be again. On the third night she stayed late, kerosene lantern hissing beside the computer because the power kept cutting out. She lined the certificates in chronological order and laid a sheet of tracing paper over the witness signatures. The names changed: Elias Ash, Nathaniel Ashford, Cornelius Ash, Evelyn's Ashford Hargrove, Beatrice's Simple Ash, but the hand beneath never did. The capital A always began with the same tiny loop, like a noose tightening. The terminal S always flicked upward, a small, satisfied checkmark. At 2:17 a.m. the lantern flame bowed though there was no draft. Mara felt the room tilt, the way it does when you stand too quickly after too little sleep. She looked up and saw him in the doorway, tall, dark-suited, ordinary in the most terrible way. He held the register from Beatrice's wedding, open to the witness page. Without hurry he took the pen from the desk, the same steel-nibbed pen that had signed every certificate since 1884, and added his newest name beneath the last. The ink was wet, black, shining. Mara watched the letters form: Thomas Ash Pendleton, the name of the boy born in 1933 who had died childless in 1989. He closed the book, set the pen exactly parallel to the edge of the desk, and stepped back into the hallway that should have been empty. When Mara followed seconds later, flashlight shaking in her hand, the corridor stretched dark and silent. Only the register remained, heavier now, the new signature already drying into the paper as though it had always belonged there. She left the house at dawn, tires spinning on frost, and never returned. The digital files corrupted the next time she tried to open them, every scanned signature blurred into grey static except the newest one, which sharpened with each failed attempt, the loop of the A growing tighter, the flick of the S more triumphant, as if the hand itself were learning to smile. The summer of 2017 was the hottest on record, the river shrunk to a silver ribbon and the rice fields baked white as bone. Sophie Pendleton, 14 in October, only child of the last male heir, had grown up on YouTube, on Reddit, on the certainty that if something evil ever touched her, the internet would see it first. She knew every story, had read Ruth's diary scans, Mara Whitfield's corrupted files, the blurry Polaroids of Beatrice screaming at nothing. She laughed at them the way teenagers laugh at jump scares, loud, defiant, secretly terrified. On the night she turned 14 she barricaded her bedroom door with a dresser, a chair, and her own body weight. She set 3 phones on tripods, all streaming live to different platforms: YouTube, Twitch, an obscure horror subreddit that promised never to take anything down. She titled the streams the same: Breaking the Pendleton Curse Live. Watch if I disappear. Chat filled instantly, 4K viewers, then 12K, then 40K, egging her on, daring her, some begging her to leave the house right now. At 11:11 p.m. the smell arrived: river mud, lilies rotting in vases, candle smoke from candles no one had lit. Sophie read the comments aloud, voice cracking but steady. Yeah, I smell it too. Chat, calm down, it's just the swamp. The temperature dropped 10 degrees in 30 seconds. Frost bloomed across the inside of the window though the night outside was 89 and humid. 11:37 p.m. The grandfather clock in the attic, silent since 1956, began to chime, slow, deliberate, 13 times and then kept going, the way a tongue keeps tasting a sore tooth. Sophie aimed a phone at the ceiling. Viewers heard the footsteps overhead, measured, unhurried, crossing the exact path Thomas had paced with his shotgun 60 years earlier. 11:49 p.m. The livestream chat scrolled so fast it became white noise. Sophie stood in the center of the room in an oversized Clemson hoodie, hair in a messy bun, clutching a kitchen knife like it was a talisman. I'm not wearing the dress, she told the camera. I'm not opening the door. You all are my witnesses. 11:57 p.m. The doorknob turned by itself, once, testing. Sophie screamed, short, sharp, real. The dresser scraped forward an inch though nothing visible pushed it. She shoved back, feet sliding on the rug, tears cutting clean tracks through the sweat on her face. 43,000 people watched the gap under the door darken, as though a shadow the size of a man had paused there to listen. 11:59 p.m. The overhead light bulb burst in a shower of sparks. All 3 phones lost focus at once, then regained it on Sophie alone. Behind her, the closet door she had wired shut with coat hangers eased open 6 silent inches. The white dress hung inside, sleeves moving though no wind touched them. Midnight. The clock stopped. The room went quiet enough to hear 43,000 people breathing through phone speakers. Sophie stared straight into the main camera, eyes wide, pupils blown black. Her mouth opened, not a scream this time, something smaller, almost curious. The dresser slid away from the door as if greased. The knob turned again, fully this time, and the door began to open onto a hallway that was suddenly, impossibly dark, the kind of dark that has weight. Sophie took one step backward, then another, the knife falling from her fingers and ringing on the pine floor like a dropped bell. The chat exploded in caps-locked panic, hearts, praying hands, skull emojis. The last thing the cameras caught clearly was her hand reaching toward the lens as if she could pull every viewer through the screen and save herself with sheer numbers. Then every feed cut to static at once, the same frame frozen on every platform, Sophie mid-reach, mouth forming a word no microphone caught, and directly behind her, in the doorway, a tall shape wearing the absence of light the way other men wear coats. November the 28th, 2025, 3:14 a.m. The house is empty now, or appears to be. The streams have been dead for 8 years, the final frames of Sophie Pendleton's face burned into a million retinas and countless memes. The county sheriff came the next morning, found the bedroom door ajar, dresser back against the wall, knife gone, white dress still hanging in the closet with the sleeves neatly folded as though someone had changed her mind. No footprints in the dust, no sign of struggle, only the faint smell of river mud that clung to the wallpaper for weeks and then simply stopped. At 9:07 a.m. the Georgetown County Clerk's Office website refreshed with a new record. Marriage license 2025 to 1178. Bride, Sophie Elizabeth Pendleton, age 14. Groom, Elias Ash Pendleton. Date of ceremony, November 28, 2025. The upload timestamp read 1 second. The clerk on duty swore she never touched the keyboard, that the printer in the back room began to whine on its own and spat out the certificate already signed, the ink still wet. She photographed it with her phone before the file corrupted. In every copy the groom's name is there for a heartbeat and then begins to fade, letter by letter, the way a bruise yellows and disappears. By the time the sheriff arrived the space was blank, only the looping flourish of the witness signature remaining, a signature that has appeared on every certificate since 1831 and never once belonged to a living man. The house itself has started to forget. The portraits in the upper hall lose detail overnight, lace collars blur, eyes sink into soft smudges, the empty spaces where grooms should stand grow wider, darker, hungrier. Visitors who come for the tours, because there are tours now, candlelight, whispered, tickets sold out months in advance, report the same thing. The smell of lilies arrives without flowers, the temperature drops though the thermostat reads 78, and every mirror in the place shows one fewer person than actually stands in the room. Tonight the grandfather clock in the attic is ticking again, steady, patient, the sound carrying through floorboards that have not creaked under human weight in years. The county website refreshes every 60 seconds, waiting for the next license to appear. Somewhere in the walls, silk brushes against plaster like a bride pacing in a dress that no longer needs a body to fill it. The name Elias Ash Pendleton has already begun to dissolve from the newest certificate, leaving only the shape of what was written, the way a wave leaves the outline of a footprint before the tide comes back to claim it. The house is ready. The river is low. And somewhere, in a room that still remembers the weight of a girl who tried to outrun her own blood, the clock counts down the hours that are left until the next 14th year begins.